With all due respect, Your Honor, we are discussing a Tier 1 direct action mission against a high-value target, not some administrative oversight. Is this court seriously expected to believe that this officer was the designated mission commander? The prosecutor, Major Clarkson, let the words hang in the sterile air of the military courtroom, his voice dripping with theatrical condescension. The crowd, a mix of uniformed personnel and credentialed press, shifted in their seats, and a few quiet, complicit chuckles echoed off the polished wood. They all looked at the woman in the defendant's chair. She did not react. Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma sat perfectly still, her spine straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, regulation bun, revealing a face devoid of makeup, a face that was unremarkable by design. There were no tells, no nervous tics, no flicker of anger or fear in her dark, steady eyes. She simply observed, her gaze fixed on a point just beyond the judge's bench, as if this entire proceeding were a minor atmospheric disturbance she had to wait out. Clarkson smirked, sensing weakness in her silence. He saw a woman promoted beyond her capability, a diversity hire who had cracked under pressure. He saw an easy conviction. But when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Marcus Thorne, seated in the front row as an observer, saw her stance, he saw something else entirely. He saw a posture of absolute energy conservation, a discipline so profound it bordered on inhuman. He saw the stillness of a predator, not of prey. If you believe that true strength is proven in silence, not in speeches, type competence below. The bailiff's voice boomed, formal and cold, as he read the charges. On the charge of gross dereliction of duty, endangering the lives of operators under your command, and causing the failure of a mission of critical national importance, how do you plead, Lieutenant Commander? Anya's own counsel, a young, overwhelmed JAG captain, stood to answer, but she placed a hand gently on his arm. She rose slowly, her movements economical and precise. Her voice, when it came, was clear and low, without a trace of inflection. Not guilty, Your Honor, that was it. No defense, no outrage, no justification. Just two words. Clarkson practically licked his lips. This was going to be easier than he thought. He paraded his witnesses, two shaken rangers from the mission's perimeter security team, who spoke of chaotic communications and a command structure that went dark at the critical moment. They never saw the commander, only heard the breakdown over the radio. Clarkson built his narrative brick by condescending brick. A leader who was absent, who panicked, who hid while her soldiers were on the line. As he spoke, two military police officers approached the defense table with a set of steel handcuffs. Your Honor, Clarkson announced, given the severity of these charges and the clear flight risk posed by an officer with special operations training, the prosecution requests the defendant be restrained for the remainder of the proceedings. The judge, a stern colonel with decades on the bench, hesitated for a moment, then nodded grimly. The MPs moved in. Anya Sharma showed no resistance. She stood, turned, and placed her hands behind her back. The metallic click-clack of the cuffs locking into place was the loudest sound in the silent room, a definitive punctuation mark on her public humiliation. The trial moved into its second day, and Clarkson decided it was time to break her. He called her to the stand. Anya walked with a measured gait, the chains between her cuffed hands making a soft, rhythmic clinking. She sat, her posture unchanged, her composure a silent, infuriating rebuke to his entire case. Commander Sharma, he began, pacing before her like a caged tiger. Let's talk about Operation Serpent's Tooth. Let's talk about the moment you lost control. He presented Exhibit, a heavily distorted audio file recovered from a damaged helmet recorder. He signaled for it to be played. The courtroom speakers crackled to life with a horrifying cacophony of noise. The sharp, tearing sound of suppressed gunfire, the crunch of debris, panicked shouting in a foreign language, and a high-pitched carrier wave that grated on the nerves. Over it all, a single, distorted American voice could be heard repeating a fragmented code. Spectre is down. I repeat, Spectre is down. Abort. Abort. Command, do you copy? Abort. The voice was strained, breathless. Clarkson stopped the recording. Commander, the voice on that recording has been identified by two separate analysts as yours. Is that you, Commander? Is that the sound of you panicking and ordering a retreat, costing us the target? He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper. Is it? The entire courtroom held its breath. The jury leaned forward. General Thorne stared at Anya, his expression unreadable stone. This was the crux of it all. Her young lawyer looked like he was about to be physically ill. All she had to do was deny it, offer an explanation, say anything. But Anya Sharma remained silent. Her gaze didn't waver. She looked directly at Clarkson, her eyes holding his, and said nothing. The silence stretched, growing heavier with each passing second, becoming a physical weight in the room. It was no longer an absence of sound. It was a presence, a force of will. Clarkson's smugness began to curdle into frustration. Cat got your tongue, Commander? Or is it that you have no defense? You sent your people into the fire, and then you lost your nerve. You abandoned your post. You abandoned your duty. Answer the question. His voice rose to a shout, echoing in the cavernous chamber. He was losing control, and her calm was the reason. He was throwing verbal punches at a ghost, and the effort was making him look foolish. The judge finally intervened, his voice sharp. Commander Sharma, this is a direct question from the prosecution. I am ordering you to answer. Anya shifted her gaze from Clarkson to the judge. A flicker of something crossed her face. Not fear, not anger, but perhaps a deep, profound regret that it had come to this. She opened her mouth to speak, to obey the judge's direct order. But before a single sound could emerge, the great oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding boom that made everyone jump. All rise, the chief bailiff bellowed, his voice cracking with shock and disbelief. Every single person in the room, from the jury to the press to Major Clarkson, scrambled to their feet, their eyes wide with astonishment. Standing in the doorway, framed by the light of the corridor beyond, was the President of the United States. He was flanked by a grim-faced contingent of Secret Service agents, and, walking stride for stride with him, was General Marcus Thorne, who had quietly slipped out of the courtroom only moments before. The air crackled with an impossible tension. A presidential appearance was unprecedented in any trial, let alone a court-martial. The silence that had followed Clarkson's outburst was nothing compared to the profound, reverent hush that now fell over the room. The president's gaze swept across the stunned faces, his expression a mask of cold fury. He ignored the judge, he ignored the prosecutor. His eyes found the small, solitary figure on the witness stand, the woman in the simple uniform with her hands cuffed behind her back. He walked down the central aisle, his polished shoes making no sound on the marble floor. The sea of uniformed personnel parted before him, as if by an invisible force. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of the witness box, looking up at Anya Sharma. Clarkson, his face the color of ash, looked as if he might faint. The president did not speak. Instead, he simply looked at Anya, and in that look, there was a universe of meaning, respect, gratitude, and a deep, shared understanding of a burden no one else in that room could possibly comprehend. General Thorne stepped forward, carrying a slender, locked briefcase. He placed it on the judge's bench and opened it with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. He removed a single folder, bound in crimson with a stark, black-bordered cover sheet. Your Honor, Thorne said, his voice resonating with an authority that dwarfed everyone else's in the room. What you are about to read is classified under Executive Order 13526, Section 14, Subsection Alpha. Its disclosure is limited to your eyes only. The judge, a man who had seen everything in his 30-year career, picked up the file with a hand that trembled slightly. As he read, his face drained of all color. His eyes widened, then widened again. He looked from the page to the woman in the witness box, and then back to the page, his expression shifting from stern judgment to utter, unadulterated awe. After a long moment, he closed the folder, his hands placing it back on his bench as if it were a sacred text. He looked at the president, then at General Thorne, and finally, at the prosecutor. Major Clarkson, the judge's voice was a low, dangerous growl. You are so far out of your depth, you're practically on the moon. The president finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. General Thorne, please enlighten the court. General Thorne turned to face the stunned gallery. He held a single, declassified summary sheet. Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma, he began, his voice a powerful cadence, like a drumbeat of vindication, was not the mission commander of the assault force of Operation Serpent's Tooth. She was Operation Serpent's Tooth. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Commander Sharma is the commanding officer of a Tier 1 Special Missions Unit designated Task Force 7, a unit so secret that its existence is denied by the Department of Defense. Her operational call sign is Nyx. She was not in a command bunker. She was the solo infiltrator on the ground, inside the target compound. For 78 hours prior to the assault, the murmurs died, replaced by gasps of shock. Thorne continued, his voice hammering home each point. The audio recording you heard was not an order to abort. It was tactical deception. Commander Sharma was deliberately broadcasting on a compromised enemy frequency to draw their elite guard away from the primary target's location and toward her own position. The Spectre is down call was a prearranged signal for the main assault force to begin their push on the now undefended side of the compound. She single-handedly engaged and neutralized 17 enemy combatants to ensure the rest of her team had a clear path. He paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle. She did not lose control. She was the orchestrator of a masterful deception that saved the entire assault force from walking into a prepared ambush. The mission was not a failure. The high-value target was captured, thanks to her. The only reason this court is even aware of this mission is because the target's capture had to be made public for geopolitical reasons, and a scapegoat was needed to protect the methods and existence of her unit. The truth landed like a physical blow. Major Clarkson swayed on his feet, his entire case, his entire worldview, disintegrating before his eyes. The president gestured to the MPs. "Sergeant, release her." The MP fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked the handcuffs. The sound of the steel clicking open was a sound of liberation, of justice restored. The president offered Anya his hand, helping her down from the witness stand. The gesture was one of profound, public respect, a clear signal to everyone present that this woman was not a criminal, but a national hero of the highest order. The story of what happened in that courtroom spread through the Pentagon, through Langley, through every forward operating base and intelligence community chatroom, like a digital wildfire. It became known as the Clarkson Correction, or, more reverently, the day Nyx came into the light. It was a story told in hushed tones, a modern military parable about the lethal danger of assumptions. Major Clarkson was never formally reprimanded. His public humiliation was deemed punishment enough. He was quietly reassigned to a dreary administrative post in Thule, Greenland, where he spent his days reviewing procurement contracts for snow tires, his career in ruins, his arrogance replaced by a haunting, permanent lesson in humility. Anya Sharma, meanwhile, simply vanished. There was no press conference, no medal ceremony, no victory tour. She gave a crisp, formal nod to the president, another to General Thorne, and was then escorted by the Secret Service out a private exit, melting back into the classified shadows from whence she came. Her silence, once mistaken for weakness, was now understood for what it was, the sacred, disciplined silence of the true professional. Months later, the legacy of that day began to solidify into doctrine. At the JAG School in Charlottesville, Virginia, a new case study was introduced into the curriculum for all aspiring military lawyers. It was titled The Sharma Precedent. The case file was heavily redacted, with entire pages blacked out, but the core lesson was unmistakable. The instructor, a seasoned colonel, would stand before the fresh-faced lieutenants and captains and tell the story. He would describe the arrogant prosecutor, the silent defendant, and the shocking presidential intervention. He would use it as the ultimate cautionary tale against hubris, against judging a book by its cover, against ever believing you have all the facts, especially when dealing with the shadowed world of special operations. The Sharma precedent became a mandatory part of ethics and operational law training, a permanent reminder that the warrior standing before you in a courtroom might have a story far deeper and more complex than any charge sheet could ever capture. The lesson was simple. Respect is not granted by rank or appearance, but earned through action, and sometimes the most profound actions are the ones taken in complete silence, far from the light of public understanding. A photograph, a grainy satellite image of the target compound from Operation Serpent's Tooth, was framed and hung in the school's main hall. Beneath it was a simple brass plaque with a single word: assumptions. The true measure of a hero is not found in the thunder of their victories, but in the quiet echo of their legacy. Anya Sharma's name would never be known to the public she protected. There would be no statues, no holidays, no laudatory newspaper articles. Her reward was not fame, but the continued existence of a nation that slept peacefully, utterly unaware of the sacrifices made in its name. Her legacy was not written in history books, but etched into the very soul of the institutions she served. It lived on in the caution of a young prosecutor who now thought twice before judging a defendant by their demeanor. It lived on in the respect a new generation of soldiers learned to have for the quiet professionals in their midst. It lived on in the understanding that the most critical battles are often fought not with explosions and gunfire, but with discipline, with intellect, and with a courage so profound it requires no audience. True strength is not the power to shout one's own worth from the rooftops. It is the quiet confidence to let one's actions speak for themselves, knowing that in the end, competence is the only truth that matters. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind for people to see. It's about what continues forward because of what you did in the dark. For more stories where quiet duty triumphs over loud disgrace and where silent competence defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.